Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Catch a Fraudster webinar. We are going to give just 60 seconds for everybody to load up through the Zoom queue, and we will get started. Really looking forward to the conversation here. So we'll get started in about, call it 30, 45 seconds. Brent will give me the thumbs up when the group is in. So. All right, close enough. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. For all of you that are in whatever time zone we're in. For those of you I have not had the privilege to meet, my name is Tom Cronkright. I'm a recovering attorney by trade, large title agency owner, co-founder of CertifID, and frankly, just in the middle of this whole issue of cybersecurity and wire fraud and the challenges that these things present on a transaction by transaction basis, even this morning. So I'll get into that in a minute, but I was involved in a recovery this morning as of 7:30 for a buyer that wired out funds last Thursday. But this webinar series really is meant to bring out fresh perspectives, insights, and essentially actionable intelligence that you can bring into your marketplaces, into your teams, into your customers. And while we do focus quite a bit on the payment side of it, this whole ecosystem of cybersecurity and I would just say digital trust between the industry and our referral partners, between us in title and our consumers that ultimately are the ones that need the protection, is wider than that disbursement of funds. And we're going to get into that today. So without further ado, and then we have this monthly. So for those of you that want to go on our website, you can catch up on previous episodes of To Catch a Fraudster. And then we have several more between now and the end of the year. So if you have questions, put them in the questions panel. Brent, that you can't see, is in the studio with me, and he will feed those to me in real time. But without further ado, I am so excited to have Diane Tomb with us. Diane is the CEO of ALTA, top of the house. What I like about Diane, she has been a pragmatic leader. She and the rest of the ALTA members, they just have their hands in the dirt on issues that really impact the industry. And again, I'm wearing two hats as we have this conversation. One as a large title agency owner, and the other as a co-founder of CertifID. So Diane, I'm going to ask you some questions about ALTA, but I want to give a quick run out. I actually read through ALTA's full timeline from inception in 1907 as the American Association of Title Men, changed right to 1924, the American Title Association, headquartered out of Detroit, and then the ATA at the time in 1962 became ALTA, headquartered out of DC, which was controversial. And then the litany of legislation and threats to the industry that you've essentially warded off through value and education. But Diane, I'm not doing you any justice. I thank you so much. And I know I say this for everyone on the session today, but maybe a little bit about yourself and some of the things that you're focused on at ALTA. I'm really interested, and we're going to have a very candid conversation about what's keeping you and others at ALTA up at night as it relates to the industry.
Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough. You think you're excited. I am so excited to be here and excited to hear from your participants, because I think, as we all know, wire fraud, no matter what we do for our industry, is always, always, always at the top of the list of something that's impacting our members, not only our members, but our industry, tons of folks, right? And I feel like being here today and being able to talk about this really important issue is just so exciting. So thank you for that. But I'm happy to sort of also kind of give you sort of the high level, where we are. And I am actually in my 4th year now as the CEO of ALTA. And I have to say, you read that timeline. It's such a fascinating organization and also industry, right? When you think about, when they went from the ALTA men, whatever the proper title was. It was around historically when women were just about getting the right to vote, in the early 20s. So like we really are a reflection of what's happening in the world, right? Because, buying a home is the most important purchase that most people make, and it's the dream that people do. Personally, I have been very fortunate to be involved in the mortgage finance / housing policy / really from all different perspectives. So I worked at Fannie Mae early in my career. I served in the administration at a high level at HUD at one point. I actually worked in the White House at one point. And, in all of those different places, the housing industry, buying a home, one of the things we did when we worked at HUD, we had a whole initiative to increase minority home ownership. Again, that was 20 years ago. So it's just so interesting to see a lot of these issues that are still out there, but that, they're evolving in today's world. And, you were asking a little bit about what's, top of line for us. We are, all living in a very fast-paced, ever-changing, dynamic world, whether it comes from public policy. In our case, there's so many new regulatory initiatives coming our way that some are not very good, that we're working really hard to sort of address and make sure that our industry is represented and heard in terms of some of the challenges. But I think we also know this digital world, as a result of the pandemic, has accelerated so many things. So it's an exciting time to be in our industry because there is so much innovation. The work that you guys are doing around this issue, but also from an industry perspective, is amazing. And I'm excited to be able to talk about, how ALTA is sort of looking at this issue, but to your point, from so many different ways, whether it's from the cybersecurity piece and our members' participation talking about that, the digital online, whether it's legislation like the remote online, or the type of stuff that we're working with other agencies to find out what other folks are doing, our partners at the realtors, the mortgage bankers. There's so many important pieces to this that, we're not going to give up like everything else. We're going to make sure we do the best job we possibly can to educate our consumers around this issue.
No, I love that. There's a running joke in title that we always blame somebody for getting us into the industry. And I'm just wondering who that person is for you.
Yeah, that's a good one because, one of the things we're trying to do also is, recruit folks out of college, because nobody really leaves college saying, wow, I want to be in title, right?
No, my guidance counselor in high school, that was not on the short list.
I know, we're going to change that. We had some interns this summer. We asked them to sort of help us come up. They suggested we represent ourselves more on TikTok, which, we all laugh, but it's probably real, right? If we do want to, right, recruit for this industry. Yeah. Well, I ended up at ALTA. Michelle, my predecessor, is actually a colleague and friend. We've known each other for years, but it was when she announced that she was leaving, a headhunter had tapped me on the shoulder and said, would this be something we consider? And interesting enough, I heard from like 3 or 4 other people who said, oh, there's this opportunity that I think it would be a perfect fit for you with your background. And I'll have to say, it's been a crazy, wild ride, but I love every minute of it. I think our industry is so fascinating. There's so much important work that we do, and the people are so amazing. And I feel like a place like ALTA, and I've been around Washington for a long time. I know it's hard to believe, right? That I say I might be a bit jaded, but honestly, I've never worked with an organization where people really come to support each other and to really benefit the industry as a whole, because, everybody wins, right, when we do that. But this place is truly unique. And so
no, I love the pedigree that you have, seeing different sides of, the issues with, the GSEs where you spent time, and some of the other organizations. We're blessed to have someone like you that's, continuing to advance the real estate industry and really have a focus on title. I agree with you. I mean, I've been in it now we'll be going on 18 years in January. And I haven't been clinically diagnosed with ADD, but there's got to be something there. But there's just enough texture and there's enough movement. It just keeps you really interested. And I think it is one of the most I came from the legal practice, one of the most collaborative groups of people. Even though we compete with logos on the street, we also know that we need each other. So
yeah, No, I love to just add one thing to your point. It does attract a certain personality of a person, right, who is really interested and wants to solve problems. But the other piece, and I know we're going to talk about wire fraud, but in the pandemic, we started a foundation because what we saw was all of the title industry folks out there helping their communities because it's the right thing to do. Not only because it's the right thing to do, it's because that's what they've always done, right? But what they never do is talk about it. They're just too busy doing it. So we sort of captured it on this social media campaign. And then when we realized we weren't going to be able to be in person for ALTA One in New York, we thought, well, what about all the budgets that are put aside for this? How can we sort of leverage that for something good? And so here we are with the ALTA Good Deeds Foundation 2 years later, and we've raised $1 million from our industry, which is that just shows you who we are, right, as an industry and what we're trying to, and we've already awarded almost $500,000 to folks.
That's huge. And to that end, I don't know if everyone saw this in the invite.
I know we didn't even plan this, but that's great.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. We are actually donating $15 for everyone registered and attending today to the ALTA Good Deeds, because there's not enough work. We hear the horror stories and we'll get into some of those, but hats off to having something formal where we as industry participants can say, here's a mechanism for us to properly give back. So that's fantastic.
And just for your listeners too, Tom, we appreciate you you guys doing that on behalf of all of your listeners today. That the grants are awarded usually if you are a member of ALTA, that gives you an extra sort of look. So we do open it up to the whole title industry. We really encourage folks to look at those nonprofits that they work with in their community, because we really want to we want to have the greatest impact in the local community that we can.
Love it.
Hearing from you all, the groups that you're involved with and how you're involved and how we can help on that way is really important.
Awesome. All right. So for housekeeping, and then we're going to do some deep dives here. Diane is a straight talker. You guys know I am. So this is going to be a gritty conversation on the back end. Questions go into chat. Support good deeds for ALTA. We're going to backfill all attendees today. ALTA One is coming up. So guys, I have had the privilege of speaking and attending, and it's just, if you haven't been to one of these conferences, ALTA One is the one where you're just going to get the insights. You're going to get the networking, both from, vendors and underwriters. And so I don't know if you want to throw a little bit against this event, Diane, and it's in an absolutely fabulous place in the country in San Diego.
Yes, no, thanks, Tom. We are we're on track to be the largest ALTA One ever, which is so exciting. And if you haven't signed up, please do, because we're getting pretty close, and we have options. So if you can't get into the hotel, make sure you check in with us. Lauren on our team will help you find a place to be. But as Tom said, the venue itself is just stunning. It's actually, we're the largest group to go back in after they just remodeled. Wow. So we're going to be sort of firsthand. And the lineup of speakers that we have, and to your point, Tom, many of our members come in a few days early who participate on committees, and we'll have our digital committee will be meeting, and cybersecurity will be meeting, and wire fraud is on all of these agendas. Our communications folks, how are we sort of partnering with other organizations and getting our materials into the hands of the right people? But it's not just that, like you said, Tom. It's really, I would say, it's very unique to this industry. It's the largest place where you can get your educational needs, you can do your networking piece of it. Our hope is that everybody walks away with a real excitement and inspiration to jump into the new year moving forward, and also reconnect, because these last couple of years have been hard for people. We've all been sort of scattered around. We've tried to do our best to host events when we can, but in some cases they weren't as well attended. So we're really excited about this one, and hope everybody on this webinar today will join us there, because I think you will not be disappointed. It is really amazing.
No, it is. You can pack more in 3 days than you could over 6 months of trying to wrangle everyone together. So
yeah. Well, that's an important part, because that's what we hear from people. I'm so busy. How can I leave? I think, to your point, it's really worth to at least give it a try, because I think you will find that it is so valuable for your own personal development, but also for your business.
Yeah, 100%. For those of you that are attending, I'll be bringing in our main point of contact from the U.S. Secret Service. I just finished, spoiler alert, I just finished some of the materials a few days ago. We're going to be exposing the dark web and looking at business email compromise as a service and just pulling the curtain back to say, okay, how easy is this to do? And what are we really up against? So it'll be all new material. And I was frightened. Brent knows this, and my business part, all my business partners, like I am absolutely terrified at how casual this language is on the dark web around recruiting and people losing their life savings. It's just absolutely wrong. So, and then we'll have a whole contingent there at our booth. All right.
Well,
Survey
it's fascinating what I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom, but it's
no, please do.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to see what you all have been able to develop with your partnership with the Secret Service. It benefits all of us. So kudos to you guys. This is great. And having them there is going to be really helpful. I know this stuff is frightening, but it's important. You know, we got to make sure people understand.
Yeah, no, necessity continues to be that birthplace of innovation. and I'm not a real smart person, Diane. I just happen to have stepped into some snares along my way in my career. So, all right, take the survey after. Brent, stop share screen. We are going to go off slides, and Diane and I are just going to have a conversation. Diane, I got to follow up on a comment that you made earlier. I didn't want to interrupt you. And it was really around your visibility to wire fraud. And I've always wanted to ask, how does it come to you? In what way does it present itself to ALTA?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom, because as I mentioned, I stepped in this role, 4 years ago. And at that time, we were having our ALTA One in San Antonio, and we had a panel, right? So this would have been 2019. And at that time, it was, I want to say relatively new, but it wasn't as widespread as it is now. Mm-hmm. And the folks who were individuals who it happened to weren't really reporting, right? And I'm sure a lot of that is still going on, but there was a lot of shame and there was a lot of people not wanting to, so we thought we really need to put this out there so people know it's okay. And that's the only way we're going to be able to address this thing. So I would say it was primarily, we were hearing it sort of back-ended, people who didn't want to come forward or people who were afraid to but they want us to do something about it, but they weren't willing to, be out there. So really 2019, I think, was when we decided to really put some light on this and get, the materials were already being developed. We were helping people sort of identify. It was more on a larger educational piece. But as you know, this thing has sort of morphed into so many different components now that we're really attacking it from so many different ways.
So if you could describe 19 in one sentence as it relates to wire fraud, and then today, how would those descriptions differ? Again, you sit at a very interesting seat. You're sitting at an 80,000 foot and ground foot level, depending on the issues that you guys are activated on. But how would you describe 19 versus wire fraud in middle of September 2022?
Well, this is perfect, Tom, because, we did a survey this summer and we surveyed over 569 title agents, and 86% of the respondents said the volume of cyber attacks on their offices either increased or remained the same compared to 2020. So no big surprises there, right? But 46% of the respondents reported their employees received at least one email attempting to change wire or pay off instructions monthly. Now, this is, everybody, right? So sort of when you look at that. But in 2020, 78% of the respondents did not recover any diverted funds, right? Well, now that has shifted, right? And so that's the good news, right? According to the 2022 survey, 94% reported some amount recovery and 17%, 100%. So that's huge, right? And I think that's where you guys come in, right?
On the back end of it, and we'll get to that. Yeah. So as you look at that study, I love the fact that we're flipping to that study, because my team was reminding me of some of the more salient points that popped out. So know that the reporting for wire fraud comes through many different ways. The most visible reporting is in the FBI's IC3 report, the Internet Crime Complaint Center. They publish a cybersecurity essentially report every single year. Business email compromise is essentially wire fraud. So business email compromise, let's just set a little bit of foundation here. Business email compromise is a formal type of cyber crime where an email account is compromised. information is weaponized, meaning information about an upcoming transfer is learned, then typically if it's a buyer, the title company is spoofed and the buyer believes they're wiring to the title company and they wire to a fraudster. It's that transfer where they monetize business email compromise through wire fraud or ACH fraud. So by the numbers, the per instance or per loss amount increased quite a bit, but the instances actually went down in real estate. So what do we see there? What we've interpreted that as, okay, they're willing to sit and they'll wait for a higher value target. Why would I pick on the earnest money deposit when it clearly says this is a cash deal in the purchase agreement? I'm going to wait for the cash to close money, not the earnest money, right? So Diane, I agree. As you read the report, let's go on both bookends. What were you most pleased by? I don't want to put you on the spot here, but what were those that you're like, oh, we still have some work to do here? Because essentially that's our voice, right? It was voice of the title agent saying, hey, this is the fraud survey for what we saw in 2021.
Yeah, well, I'll start with, I think, for obvious reasons, this still is one of the number one issues whenever we talk to any of our members, right? Is dealing with wire fraud. And I think what I'm pleased about is that people now feel somewhat empowered, or they have some tools to do something about it. The shame is gone, like we're all over that now, right? Yeah. We all know every day, all of us are getting some type of phishing, something that doesn't look right or isn't. And so there's an awareness across the board that we all need to work together. So that, to me, I know that's sort of very broad, but I feel like we're finally there because, there was a time when, the banks and others were like, oh, I don't know, like not everybody was sort of acknowledging, what's happening here. And now we're all on the same page, which is huge.
No, I think it took the industry. Look, we were victims of wire fraud in our agency in 2015. And if you just go by the numbers, that was like, I call it beta or startup phase. I mean, there were, not even maybe 50 million in loss that year. It was nothing. And now we're approaching what, 4 billion in loss in a matter of just a handful of years. So one of the other statistics or responses that I saw was essentially almost 80% of the title industry is trying to manage this risk on their own. And they're not going out and I would argue really understanding the insurance and the protection that they may or may not have. They're not looking at third-party solutions. And this isn't a certified infomercial. I'm just saying what do you hear from title agents to say, okay, oh, this is a callback issue, or this is put something on the bottom of the email signature line. Like, where do you think there could be some movement in a direction here where we can, solve this at scale if it can be solved at scale?
Yes, no, Tom, I think that's really, really important. That's kind of where we, I think, have a huge opportunity. And I think we're beginning to do that. But, sort of let's think about who our members are, right? Or the title industry as a whole. Many of our members, 76% of them are mom and pops, so they're small shops. So think how spread thin they are, right? In terms of, we know these last 2 years have just been, wildly busy for everybody, and people are still coming off of that, right? So when we think about sort of the mindset where everyone is, and then it happens, you're like, what do I do next, right? Like, what do I call the local place to? So they're the sort of simple things that we've been working on, and we have multiple resources, a couple of them that I'll share, and maybe Megan can put some of them in the chat area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it would be really helpful. So we have, one of them is our ALTA Cybersecurity Incident Response Plan. So these are free for our members. They're right there. And this would be a great thing for everybody to just sort of make sure they're inputting these things within their own organizations, no matter what side you are, right?
Let me backfill that, Diane. So I was invited to join the Cybersecurity Committee of ALTA a little over a year ago. It's the first committee I've ever served on. If you're not serving on something, if you're not doing it at ALTA, at least do it at your local land title association level. Exactly. But the response plan that Diane is talking about was a culmination of hundreds of man hours of debate and what are the trigger and essentially the waterfall that would take place between notice of an incident and a full post-incident analysis and cure. So if you don't have one of these, I could not, I mean, this has got to be one box you check. And not only having it in a file or a drive, but run the tape on it. Like, act as if you're responding to an incident and who does what and when, because we'll talk about wire fraud in a little more detail, but minutes matter. I mean, they absolutely do.
Totally. And to your point, Tom, the amount of like intellectual capital and expertise that went into this,
Yeah.
Amazing, right? And these are all people donating their time to be part of these, to make sure our industry has access to
Yeah,
this.
we had underwriters, we had underwriting counsel, we had ALTA, we had people from
Right.
the insurance, from the technology. Like, this wasn't just, you know, a couple people sitting around having lunch saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice? Let's write this on a bar napkin and send it in. There
No,
was great debate on that committee around what is included, what's not, and essentially the flow of what a proper incident response looks like. And for those of you that are on the committee, thank you, because for the industry, that was a great update that was made.
yeah, no, I appreciate you encouraging folks to serve on committees, because like you said, you'll be amazed how much you learn and the expertise and what people are willing to share. That's what I love about this group.
Totally.
Everybody. You know, the other piece, of course, is being prepared, right? So we also have what we call the ALTA outgoing wire preparation checklist. So, you know, you can pull this checklist up and you can just sit there at the table with your customer if you want, and just make sure all of these things happen, you know, and it looks professional. Again, it's not just a checklist that somebody just sat down and put lots of hours of time of people thinking through strategically, thoughtfully, what's important, how it needs to be done. And again, these things are right at your fingertips. And then we have a rapid response plan. And to your point, because I think, Tom, you know, a lot of these things seem so simple and they seem so obvious, but when that happens to you, you're almost stunned, right? You're kind of frozen. So you don't really know what to do right away. So having these things, having already reviewed these things, having your team be aware of it, you know, making sure you're doing something very quickly is really, really, really important.
Yeah. So on the rapid response, I'll just give you an example.
Yeah.
I'm going from one office to another. Yesterday, I get a phone call from a large real estate broker here in Grand Rapids. And he said, Tom, we have a wire incident and I need your help. And we don't work with him on the title side, but he's a colleague in the industry, and we tend to be people's first call, which is good. And it took until this morning at 9 o'clock to convince the buyer, in this case, the victim, to have a one-on-one conversation with me, because he said, oh, I talked to local law enforcement and my community bank is on it and this and that. And I want to backfill this rapid response idea in the sense that they're moving money faster than they've ever moved. So what happens is we have the business email compromise, we have a victim. That victim is tricked into, and they're voluntarily sending it. This is why this isn't covered by our insurance. They're voluntarily sending the money. Somebody didn't hack into their account.
Right.
So they send it thinking they're sending it to the closing company, the escrow company, or whoever it is. It doesn't land. He learns last Thursday afternoon at the closing table that his $94,000 was wired to the wrong account. So fast forward, today's Wednesday, right? So it was Tuesday afternoon, we learn of it. These people are moving quickly. So the money will go from his account to the Money Mule account. There could be a Money Mule, that's what we call a professional mule, that has instructions on what to do next. It could be non-professional or non-complicit. It could be a dating scam or elderly scam victim. It could be somebody doing a work from home, but they don't know exactly what they're wrapped up in. But typically we see quickly a mule gets paid, typically 10 to 15% of that initial wire payment. And then a series of things can happen, because with a wire, it's immediately available funds. If it lands, there's no seasoning or holding on that. So unlike a check, if I gave you a cashier's check, Diane, and you went to pull that out in cash or wire against it, you'd have to at least have an average daily balance above the amount you deposited for them to withdraw that, because it's going to take several days. Wires are immediate. So it can be, they could take that money, pull it out in cashier's checks, pull it out in cash, wire to other accounts, or what we've seen, unfortunately, is the use of crypto wallets.
Wow.
So they'll move money to a crypto wallet. Then they'll further anonymize that transfer through what's called a crypto tumbler. Then it transfers into a cryptocurrency, typically in the country that they're trying to move into a bank account. So frequently goes from here to a crypto like Kraken, then it gets into a tumbler, it goes to a South African wallet, and then it dumps into a South African bank. We see that on a rinse repeat basis.
Wow.
So I'm going to dive into this more at ALTA One, but what was like the 72 to 96 hours? I mean, that was even socialized early days. Hey, within 72 hours, we can trigger SWIFT and this and that. That's not the case anymore, like today or tomorrow. So I told this buyer, and the agent was freaked out when she called me this morning. I've had all this education, but I've never had it happen to me or one of my customers. I said, look, if they don't know by noon what the status is of that account that received the funds, we're talking like gonzo. Like there's going to be no chance of recovery.
Isn't it true that Fridays are usually a time where that happens a lot?
We call it Fraud Fridays, and I don't mean that to make a branding term out of it, but even my kids, I got an 8-year-old, and we'll be traveling to some soccer game, and they'll see the fraud hotline on my cell phone. Oh, Dad, Fraud Fridays, and it is. And why that is think about it. We have TRID Tuesdays, and then we fund on Fridays. That's just the natural rhythm of the industry.
Right.
The presentation of wiring instructions tends to be when you have that final TRID statement, the CD, and then the fake wiring instructions, typically Tuesday, Wednesday for a Thursday, Friday transfer. Why they like that is that over the weekend, crypto wallets run on a 365 basis. It's not like the Federal Reserve that closes. So when they move off of a clearinghouse rail like the Federal Reserve into a crypto rail, then they can just wheel that. So by the time Monday morning goes around, it's washed through Hong Kong and Singapore and northern Russia, and we see this and there's no way, right? So yeah, that's and they know, guys. You think, well, isn't that coincidental? It's not coincidental at all. If you looked at, and Brent's done this for all of our companies, if you monitor the amount of targeted phishing attacks that come in, take a look at the last week of the month on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and you will see guaranteed a spike every single month of people trying to get information, mortgage payoff fraud, either seller net proceeds fraud, but they know the industry very well.
Yeah, no, and to your point, those are things as a business person you could be thinking about at the end of the month. You know, what's happening that last week? Something's not going, trust your instincts on those things, right? Because there's a reason why they're doing these things, and they're becoming so more sophisticated than ever.
I completely agree with you. I mean, they're just frankly making too much money for them to ignore real estate. And we've talked before, Diane, about real estate being this perfect cocktail because it's very visible. A lot of money changes hands, multiple parties,
right?
A lot of email accounts that aren't fully secured, or they're using, free email services.
Yeah.
And if any one person's exposed, yeah.
People are, it's the biggest, purchase they're going to make in their life for most people. So there's a lot of information being sent at you at that time, and you want to make sure you don't miss it, right? Particularly in this market that we've had.
So I want to provide a layered question, and I want to go to 80,000 feet. I know my team is giggling right now because I use that term a lot. I want to ask a question in different angles as far as like your concerns about wire fraud, and at the highest level, what's your industry level concern if we don't manage this properly?
I think our reputation is at stake, and I know that sounds sort of not very tangible, but I mean that's what we have, right? When we sit down at that table every day, and as you know, I've heard this from multiple people. I hear something from the realtors pointing their finger at somebody, and everybody's pointing fingers at each other. And I think the most important thing for us as an industry is to be a leader, right? And to really sort of step up. And I will say, this is what I say about our industry as a whole. Again, during the pandemic was a perfect example. We always punch above our weight, right? We're dealing with the big guys. We got the mortgage bankers, and we got the loan, all of these other, the GSEs and everybody. We're willing to do the work. Like, we're willing to sit down and draft that piece of legislation that everybody wants. We're willing to because we know at the end of the day, we want to get it right and we want to be accurate. And I think we are, when we're going up to Capitol Hill and we're talking to, public policy folks, and we're really trying to educate them on what our industry does, we're sort of the umpire, our umpire, right? Our job is to make sure it gets done right, and it gets done for the individual. We don't have a dog in that fight as much as we are that it gets done accurately. So I think it's a reputational thing, and that's a really important thing.
I completely agree. Let's go to 60,000 feet and let's just talk about legislation that could affect this. So if we say, not so much worried about the reputation, or I'm still worried about the reputation, it seems to me there's this layer of just regulation or something that could over-rotate in this area that would not be a benefit to the industry. Have you guys thought or discussed that?
Every day we're fighting off so many different things on the legislative front, right? And there's often, we've seen this in so many different areas, unintended consequences, right, that happen. And we're seeing that with the redacting information, the piece of legislation on the judges, and the requirements that for our industry around that. So we've been very successful because I think we bring sort of like a clarity to folks who they're just not familiar, right? And we're able to do that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been doing around wire fraud is, as you know, because you're working with the Secret Service, but there are many different federal agencies addressing this issue from all different. So we have successfully, it was actually put into place last July, had some language on the House side, on the appropriations in the commerce piece, that basically encourages and it requires now reporting, for the FBI annually to be able to update, the private sector on all of these issues, and working really close with the IC3 folks, right, and the reporting piece around that, which is huge. We've been working very closely with FinCEN. For those of you who don't know, it's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I believe they're part of
U.S. Treasury. Yep.
Yeah, which is similar to the Secret Service, right? So again, and they're all doing separate things. So what we felt was really impactful, we've been working on this for the last years. We will now have some, insight as to what's out there and who's doing what and how do we all connect the dots to make this work. Because everybody was sort of not intentionally, it's just sort of how the federal government works, right? They'll throw money at this and that, but nobody's sort of coordinating all those efforts. So again, it doesn't sound like a big deal. That's a huge deal. Like that will give us so much more information and so many more partners to bring to the table to sort of approach this,
No, I agree. The IC3 historically has just had this blender effect where real estate BEC gets thrown into every other, and you look at the numbers and you're like, this just can't be accurate. And then what can you expect if you file a report?
Right.
And what is the victim response need to be? So I completely agree.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to 40,000 feet. The ALTA member. What are your concerns about wire fraud as it impacts, the entity itself that, the ALTA membership, the individual ALTA member, I should say?
Yeah, we have 6,000 members, right? Which is amazing. And I think, participating, many of them they're not really as engaged. So they don't really know that we have all these resources,
Yeah.
We're talking about earlier. So that's one of the things we're really focused on, making sure that the folks who don't show up to committee meetings, and not everybody can afford to go to ALTA One, how do we get into their hands? And again, now we can do this like this. There's more opportunities for us to do educational. So there's a huge educational component of it. We actually have information that they can send, digitally to their clients to sort of, here's what to look out for. They can brand it themselves. We have all kinds of resources. We have the ALTA wire fraud video, right? That
it's a great video, by the way. If you guys have not seen that, I mean, something to put that in the workflow or have the real estate agent at the time of listing or contract. It's right. Very well done.
Yeah. And like we said, you can brand these, and we even have infographics, as you know, to get into the hands of folks. So that's our goal, is to really, get down to the grassroots level and make sure the resources and the information that we have that has been worked on, as you said, by, our members. So the expertise gets into the hands of folks that really need it, who are sitting there at the table.
Yeah. What we've seen, and I'm just curious how you would respond to this, is that folks don't understand that this risk in particular may be a self-insured risk, either partially or completely. And I say that because there's no form of coverage for a consumer getting tricked outside of a title agent's network in wiring funds to a fraudster. There's not. There may be some cost of defense on the margin for social engineering, but those policies really are meant to protect the named insured on those policies. And the same is true, and we've looked at these and we've distilled the leading policies in the country. The most coverage that you can get is $250,000. Even if I have 5 million of E&O and 5 million of cyber, they're going to sublimit me down to 250 on wire fraud. And then they're going to put a list of what are called conditions precedent for me to even trigger coverage. So would you agree that this is also a balance sheet issue? Like, it could affect the liquidity and sustainability, because this is one of those that we've seen. You don't get to pick the loss amount up front that you want to self-insure. You learn it on the back end.
No question. I think to your point, Tom, this could be devastating. This could, like, you could lose your business as a result of one bad situation, right?
Yeah, we had a situation with an agent that got hit with a mortgage payoff fraud, and he was alerted to fraud number one. They went through and did an analysis going back 90 days. And if any of you have been hit with a mortgage payoff fraud, you got to slam the brakes and do a file by file review of every single payoff that you have done going back 60 or 90 days, because this isn't the only instance we've seen of this. He uncovered a much larger amount, just under $1 million, that had just been wired out. So call it, first one was 300. This was 900 and change, and over 10 that were queued up to disperse. So what we'll see with a fraudster is to say, hey, if the pickings are good, they're going to stay in the same field. So if you could get a title company to send you one mortgage payoff, they see that there's a hole in the security fabric, and we're going to continue to make that a much bigger hole to exploit. And that's what we've seen. And he told me candidly that it would have bankrupted me had we helped him with the 900 recovery. He had to get a business loan and put a mortgage on his house to cover off the original one. And had he not had the recovery on the one, notwithstanding the other 10 or so that were in the queue, it was lights out. I mean, and those are jobs and livelihood and college tuition. I mean, that's right. I mean, we're all dealing with life in this. So
yeah. And I think to your point, I think there's probably a lot we don't know about, right?
Right. There's a lot,
unfortunately. Right.
I think that's the biggest thing. Is I would estimate, even with the awareness and all the things that all of us are trying to do between the local level and the national level and everything in between, I would conservatively say that 20% max is being reported. Like this fraud from this morning, it wasn't reported to the IC3. They went to the county sheriff. Well, no offense, good people. I'm glad they're there, but they're going to look at it and say, wait a second, it went from your bank to I don't even have jurisdiction.
Right.
Like, this is a federal issue. And you call the FBI office. I've done that. And look, we love the FBI, but they're not going to investigate a single $94,000 transfer. The bar right now is probably $2 million.
Right. Small potatoes for those. Small potatoes.
Yeah.
Right. But that, to your point, like the IC3, they will. We need to make sure people know where to go and how, obviously we want to prevent it. That's a big piece of it. But right now we're spending a lot of time just being able to recover portions of it, right? Like the work that you guys, I remember you guys telling me this story about how you really wanted to be focusing on the front end, but there was so much happening on the back end, you really have to, unfortunately, right?
You have to. I mean, for those of you to fill in that blank, thank you. We have a full-time recovery services team. Right. I mean, it was last Thursday or Friday, we got 11 in nationally in one day. And there isn't a day goes by that we're not getting 3 to 5. And these are funds lost. This isn't, hey, I think I might have. This is, oh my goodness, my closer just told me that my money didn't land. And guys, this isn't a small town, NFL town. It's not, it's like everything.
Right. And how do they, Tom, how do they find you?
They find us typically through either the title agent, either the underwriter, or they Google us. If you Google wire fraud recovery or get me my money back on a wire, we're the #1 organic search on Google. Yeah. And these are people that we find in their worst moment. We've been trained. I've trained the team, we piloted this last year, and then we actually made this part of our solution now, because it's just going to happen. I mean, and I'll get raw here. No matter what we do, there's still this element of human error. And I believe firmly from everything that I've seen that wire fraud prevention does start with an open and honest and engaging conversation about the risk. And the risk is theirs. We have to educate ourselves as industry participants on the disbursement side.
Yes.
But a brunt of it is being borne by the consumer side. And every single, and I mean this, every single time I communicate with a victim, I ask them, how were you made aware of this risk before you wired funds? And I'm yet to hear somebody say yes. They say, I didn't even know this was a thing.
I know.
I didn't even know this was a thing. And if we talk about opportunities in market, I believe that wire fraud prevention is a winning model because it's a leadership model.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Right. Well, and to your point, again, this is the most significant, largest investment most people will make in their life, and to not, make sure that they understand that. So that's an area we can focus on, as we put together our materials to make sure that the title insurance, folks make that clear, right?
Well, and we have to enroll our referral partners.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would argue that at the listing phase, not only are we making sure that we're listing the right property and we've got ownership that's going to sign the listing agreement that we can bind them to and all these other things. Hey, there's this other thing we have to talk about, and it's wire fraud. And if we sit down with a buyer and they were looking at 30 homes, maybe we're looking at 10 homes in this market, your funds could be at risk. And I wouldn't know about it, says the real estate agent, nor would the title company.
Right.
And here's some information. And could you just sign here to acknowledge that we had this conversation? Like there's a path, there's a roadmap to meet what's called the current best practice or standard of care, because you either meet it on the front end or you could be held responsible on the back end. We're seeing a ton of litigation right now develop state and federal. Right. And the real estate agent, the broker, and unfortunately the title settlement is named.
Well, and that's because it wasn't, to your point, I know I'm stating the obvious, but if we could do this up front, they wouldn't have to do that stuff on the back end, right? We could avoid all of that, right? Yeah. We know whatever they do, we're not going to like it. So, the sooner we sort of step up to sort of address this, and, I get it, right? Like you're sitting down at the table, it's supposed to be a happy event, right? Or but there's a way to just make sure people know that you're looking out for their best interests. We're doing this for your own purposes, and people have to get comfortable with that.
Yeah. And you have to have the courage to educate yourself and then educate your referral partners so that they can educate the consumer. Because we've had instances where the fraudsters, they get to the consumer before the title commitment's even issued.
Right.
If they're in a real estate agent's account, guys, they can mock up a closing statement. They know how to do prorations because they've seen closing statements in the email before, and they can convince, and we've seen it, buyers to say, hey, sorry, but we've seen them we saw one that made up a fake Ohio law and cited some statute that had nothing to do with it. Pursuant to Ohio, blah, 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 we have to have a wire for all the closing proceeds 45 days in advance, or we will delay the closing. And they wired the money out.
Wow.
I know. Wow. So anyway, we can go down this rabbit hole.
We have one of the things that we're working with, actually next week, we're working with HUD is through their equivalent to HOP for us, but the money that they do with all of the folks, the homeownership, I think I'm exactly, their education program, which is, multi-million-dollar campaign where we will have our information will be handed out to folks, particularly low to moderate income and others who, that really need that information because, they're not always getting, all of the information, and sometimes there's language barriers. There's so many other things that, are part of that. So we are partnering with them to get it out to that wide audience as well, which I'm very excited about.
No, thank you. And that's huge because those are the most devastating ones. Everything's devastating, but it's the family that saved up the $22,000 or $30,000 over 10 years with the promise of getting out of a residential rental into actual home ownership. And when that money's gone, it's especially with price and rates increasing, it could actually box them out of the ability to even qualify again.
Forever, right?
Yeah, forever. Yep. Can you look at the Q&A real quick? All right, Diane, to close the loop on this, why Diane brought that up, yes, we have a very unique relationship with the U.S. Secret Service, and we have evolved into just a massive partner of active wire fraud intelligence for consumers in the title industry and those participants. So, all right, I've got two more questions, and then I want to open it up to Q&A. The first question is, do you believe the title industry is doing enough on the cybersecurity side? And if not, if so, why? If not, then where are those, not granular, but more like, call it rocks versus sand, where are those themes that we should start leaning into more as we go into this next market cycle?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, I think we can never do enough, right? So there's always more that can be done. And I think broadening our reach of who's participating is a good place to start, right? We can also partner with our partners, right? We work with lots of other groups, like with MISMO and some of these other groups, where there's lots of opportunities for us to be doing more. And that has been, a top priority on our end for that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
What does success look like for an ALTA member over the next 3 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, we all know there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the economy. There's, I think, a leveling out of sort of the craziness for the last couple of years. But let me sort of address what I think ALTA wants to do. We want to make sure that people know we're leaning in this environment, because we know that that's more important to be planning for that future, whether it's on the regulatory front, which, I think on the financial services industry as a whole has really been I think a focus in a bad way for our industry. And we're continuing to sort of fight back on that and make sure that, there's on so many different levels that happens. I think, the work that we do getting folks elected, our TAN, which is each and every one of our members can sign up and send letters, and making sure our voices are heard, as an industry is really, really valuable. And I think, one of the great things that we do as an industry is we really do focus on the future and how the innovation that has come into our industry, right? So taking into consideration what we're talking about here today, what our innovation and our industry looks like down the road will be a result of, in a negative way, what's happened with wire fraud. But also when I think of like remote online notarization and all of those things, we have the ability to anticipate, because we know what these things look like as that is being developed. So I think that's really exciting for us as an industry.
No, I agree. And,
yeah.
And I do think this corrective cycle is a refinement. I have mentors that say you never let a good crisis go to waste, because there's always opportunity. Either, and as we model from an agency standpoint, 20 and 21 are not repeatable. You got to look at 19. How are you progressing against 2019? And I know we all came off of what I call the COVID bloat as an industry, because we just hired anybody and everybody just to answer the phone and get it was almost like the snake swallowed a basketball, and we were just trying to work through that. And,
right.
And now that we have, it's like there's a lot of learnings, and I'm just speaking from my own experience. All right, one more double click on this. You have a piece of soft clay in your hands, and you're molding a title agent with the best version of themselves going into the next 2 years. Walk me through some of the just attribute level characteristics of what a title agent looks like.
That's a great question, because I think so, again, like, so much comes up about recruiting, folks wanting to recruit and what is, the right person. I think, we have members who have shared with us, they do personality tests, right? They know that they can do different things. And I think there's a combination of all of those things. But I think most importantly, you have to be somebody who's willing to step out, to your point, and be courageous, and making sure people understand what it is they're getting themselves into. And that, your job at the end of the day is to make sure everything is done right and that they're being protected, right? Like that's really, that's an oversimplification, but that's really what your job is, right? And I think as a as a title insurance person, you can learn how to do that, but I think you have to bring that with you every day, right? There's a certain expectation and integrity that I think we look for in our industry. And I see it at ALTA every day. It's so awesome. And it's infectious. I think when you see other people, you call them out if they're not doing it to the level they should be doing it, right?
No, I agree. I think it's just the industry tends to represent a heart for service.
Yeah.
Because we don't make anything up. We don't make up the public records. We don't make up whether or not taxes or HO are paid. We don't make up anything on the purchase agreement. I'm just, to your point, I'm this trusted safe harbor, right?
Yeah.
That is allowing the buyer and the seller to transact against what is their largest asset in an infrequent transaction in their life. And that's a lot of weight on our shoulders. And I see more, not fewer things to manage with that weight. And
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will say one thing that, we see often, which I really admire about our industry. Our members bring us, if they see funny things happening in the market, they bring that to us, and we start looking at it and we start, asking around and seeing things. So they're also, vigilant against each other. They want to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is
all right. Q&A. Brent, we got any?
2 parts.
Yep.
Has ALTA seen any value over the last few years from the Stop the Wire Fraud Coalition? Has there been any progress in continuing partnerships with NAR and other associations?
Great question. So if you heard that, Stop the Wire Fraud Coalition, what's the scoreboard look like there? And where are we on getting what I call the trifecta together, which is ALTA, NAR, and the MBA? Or so I'll let you run with that.
Yes. So as you may recall, it was in 2000, it was early. Well, we started in 2019. We started our Tell Our Story campaign. And as a part of that, working with both the realtors and with the MBA, we have developed all types of informational videos, joint materials, and other ways to educate not just our title folks, or the original campaign was really to educate public policy people and others, but even more broadly. So for us, our Tell Our Story campaign really has allowed us to talk about all these different issues at many different levels to different audiences, and we've put a significant investment in that. And we've seen I can't honestly say that we track the Stop the Wire Fraud information, because it's like, well, how many brochures we've handed out, or what I mean? Or
you can't prove a negative. That's the problem, right?
Unfortunately,
you can't prove. You only hear when it happens. You rarely is it socialized that it was prevented.
Right. But that being said, we are constantly, I know you all have done a really good job being out on Good Morning America, but we've got lots of local media that we do. We any opportunity we can to get out there and sort of educate people on these opportunities we do with those organizations, but with larger ones. We looked at like I think it's the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. There was an opportunity to partner with them on educating their audiences on wire. So outside of the big guys, we look at sort of the more vulnerable audiences. How can we help them address this, and as you probably know, we worked very closely with the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Board, to help them. So all the materials they have on their website, we provided a majority of them for them to help them. Yeah, which has been another way that we feel like we can make a huge contribution.
How are you on time? Do you have 2 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh wow, we're already at noon.
I could talk all day.
Right.
Yeah. And everybody knows that. No, the back half of this is, where are the other stakeholders in this conversation? So how would you describe that?
No, that's a really good question, because I think I mentioned earlier, banks and others, wire fraud to them is the safest way to transfer money. So sometimes they are afraid to sort of, recognize that there could be some other things that could be addressed. I think the most important piece really is on the realtor side, because oftentimes they're the ones who are sitting there at the table. So, I know we have a big focus on how do we educate the realtors, and, our title agents have such good relationships with them, right? How do they sort of work together around this? And part of it is just getting, having that conversation. People often don't want to either take the time, or they don't think they want it to disrupt any type of, aspect of the actual transaction. They don't want to for lack of a better word, spook the customer, right? They want things to go as smooth as possible, but it's important, and it's something that they both have to agree that in today's world, that they both have to attack this from that approach.
Yeah, if you're elevating that with NAR, wherever, whenever, I am there. So
Yeah.
we just so desperately need their engagement at that level, because it just could seed the proactive exchange of information. You never know what a consumer grabs onto, but
Right.
if we leave them behind and there's a vacuum, and the only time they've ever heard of wiring money is from a fraudster impersonating the title settlement company, there's no contrast, and they're just left behind, and they don't need to be.
Yeah.
So, all right, one more question.
Okay.
Real-time payments with its request and approve workflow, which can be done with the sender and the recipient in real-time communication, seems to offer a bit more comfort and security. Would you agree?
Did you hear that?
Yes,
Okay.
100%. We're a huge advocate of that. We've been doing everything we can to sort of promote that and get it passed, because I think that's the future, right? If we can get things in place, then we wouldn't be having these conversations. Not that I didn't enjoy this time here, Tom, but
No, I agree. A larger rail for peer-to-peer is, I completely agree. Yep.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Diane, I can't thank you enough. Any parting thoughts, words of infinite wisdom coming from your seat? That you've shared a lot of breadcrumbs here today.
Well, I feel like, I just want to be clear, I feel like our work is not done, right? We have so much to do, and we appreciate the work that you all are doing around this, because you really are elevating it at a level that it needs to be. I appreciate all of the folks who are participating here today. And, we're going to continue to focus on this and make sure that it gets the amount of attention that it deserves, and that we can really make some, I like your idea of going back to NAR, because I think we have a lot of new information now with our recent survey and other things that we can help package for them, right? It's really just making it as easy as possible for them to be able to give that to their customers at all different levels.
I think all that is framing and timing. And like I say, tap me in. Diane, Megan, Deirdre, all of you at ALTA, we're huge fans. I can't thank you enough. I know you're insanely busy fighting the good fight for us. And for all of you that attended, please fill out the survey at the end. To the extent that there are questions we didn't get to answer, we'll backfill those. We'll download and backfill those. We like all the questions answered. And until next month, everybody stay safe out there. And thank you for attending. Diane, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Have a great rest
everything
of the day.
you've done. Okay, you too.
Take care.
Bye.